How did you get into this?
Well, no, first we have to ask you, what is good in the hood?
Yeah, that's true.
Like, what is good in your hood? Because we forgot to do it with you last time.
Yes.
Because we were so excited to have you.
I know.
So what we mean by what's good in the hood, it's just like when we share our good news, like what's going on, what happened this past week in your life, what's good in the hood. It could be something quirky, but whatever, what's good in the hood.
Mine is probably, so I don't know, so I'm excited about this because my 9-month-old has been teething for like her whole life. Like I'm not even joking. Like she's been teething.
Yes, there are babies that have been born with teeth.
Yeah, so she's been teething, but like there's no teeth. Like there's just been no teeth the whole time, right? Yeah. And it's just funny because she loves to eat, and like my mom's like, how is she eating so good with no teeth? And I was like, I don't know. She just gums all her food, and she's like, so anyway, the good news is that yesterday, she likes to drink kefir, and so I poured it's like a yogurt that's like it's like fermented yogurt, whatever. Yeah. So I pour it in a little shot glass because it's a little cup, like her size, you know. So she's drinking her kefir out of this shot glass, and then I hear clink, 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 and I was like, what's that little ting? And then I took it from her and looked at her, and I saw a little like ting that had popped through like the night before, and I was like, yeah, oh my God, your whole life.
Finally.
So that's my good news. I know it might be lame, but I'm like really excited about this because she's been teething. Like it's no joke, like for 9 months.
Oh my God, that's a big deal.
So that is good news in our house. We're celebrating her, and
that's so exciting.
Well, this means that new foods are in store. Almost close to having some more types of
like diversifying the food.
Yeah, well, maybe not even having to have mush.
She doesn't eat mush. That's why my mom made the joke that she's eating good because like she's been eating like she eats green beans, she eats chicken, she eats bagels, but no teeth.
That's crazy.
She never let it stop her.
No wonder you're excited about her teeth.
You're learning something. Remember this, okay? How excited you are that nothing stops her when she's 7, okay? Remember that you appreciate this trait in her, okay?
That's good advice. She's very headstrong. That's how I think she was able to eat so well with no teeth.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Don't forget it. Just remember, she's been like this her whole life.
That's just
it makes her great. It gives me a headache, but it makes her great.
It is true. It shows that she like persevered. Like she didn't let anything. I mean, like I was eating some really good food. Like I was eating collard greens. And she was like trying to eat them. And I'm like, you don't have any teeth. And my mom's like, don't hold her back.
That's awesome.
She wants it. I was like, all right. And she likes spices. She was eating Chipotle yesterday. You know what? Just like,
that's amazing.
Just do you.
Oh my God.
Right.
That's a good one. Good in the hood.
I know. That's
really
good.
Cute.
Listen, don't have babies anymore.
Yeah.
So this is a great what's good in the hood.
Okay.
Teething. Lisa is not keeping you up at night. You know, my mom would have said, put some whiskey on them gums.
Did she really? Is that,
yes. Oh, granddad. Yes. She did it to my son.
Oh my God.
She's like, put a little granddad on there. He'd be all right.
Granddad.
Old granddad. Have you ever heard of old granddad?
No.
It's old whiskey. Yeah.
Oh
whatever.
God. Old school.
Did she do it to you?
I'm sure she did.
She was like,
put that whiskey on there.
Plastering it on.
Okay.
All right.
Whiskey, too much whiskey can
Right.
get people into trouble.
Right.
Which could land them behind jail.
Right.
Which is
There you
your.
go. That's a transition.
Which is your. But I'm doing too. You like that?
She transitioned. That was smooth.
Which is your area of expertise.
Yeah.
So my friend always said, because that when you're, in school and you're studying and you get to like your level of education, people always expect you to know a whole bunch of stuff, right? But really they don't realize when you study, you take one tiny piece of things and you become an expert on this tiny piece. So remind us what your piece is.
Well, so my little piece of incarceration research really focuses on the racial and political dynamics behind bars. So I mainly study essentially, I guess you could call it the prison society, how prisoners and correctional officers and prison personnel in general build a whole separate world behind bars, and how prison policies affect this, and just a whole facet of things that happen behind bars. That's really my main focus. I do some research on inequality as it relates to who is more likely to end up in prison, but the vast majority of my research is really just what happens in prison as a result of outside influences.
Wow. How did you get to that? That's just, I'm interested.
Well, because I started out really interested in gangs, and so that sort of led me to studying, okay, so then what happens to gangs once you get in prison? But then as I started studying gangs in prison, I realized that a lot of the work on gangs actually take this perspective as though gang members are like evil or have some sort of like criminal pathology. And I found in my work that yes, in the world you do have bad people, but usually they're the product of a specific type of environment. And my research is actually showing that beyond that, the correctional personnel have a strong influence on what happens behind bars, even much more so than gangs. And I actually am showing how they actually impact gangs in a very negative way and make prisoner organizations. And I say prisoner organizations because there's lots of types of organizations behind bars.
Okay.
Not just gangs.
It's a whole world and culture, isn't it?
Yeah, and I actually have found that it's policies that are coming from the Department of Corrections and how corrections employees are enforcing these policies actually has a much greater impact on violence behind bars, on whether or not inmates even need to form gangs. And so I am very much taking a different approach than those who are taking this criminal pathology approach to people just being naturally bad. Versus I'm saying, no, it's actually more about the way that you treat people in prison. It determines levels of violence and conflict.
So you just said why people would need to form gangs. I thought that was just interesting. So what in your work have you found has made people need to even form a gang behind bars?
So what I have found is my work really does support the basic notion that people form gangs in prison for survival, right? And it's for their physical protection, because when you're in an environment like prison, you do have a higher likelihood of violence because you're in an enclosed space with a lot of people who may be predisposed to more violent reactions to conflict, right? And so people end up needing to form organizations. And the reason I say organizations because you have different types. So you have some that are like, small little cliques that people form. You have full-fledged organizations like prison gangs, and you also have social movement groups that form in prison. But the difference between the basic protection narrative, which is what a lot of people say, it's like common sense, right? You're in prison, you need to form groups for protection. My research actually shows that people aren't just protecting themselves from other prisoners, they're actually protecting themselves from guards and correctional personnel in general. So that's mainly my main, if you would call it contribution to the research in this area, is to show how people need to protect themselves from the prison itself, and how the prison itself foments conflict between prisoners, which increases their likelihood of forming gangs because they're causing prisoners to fight.
Wow.
And what does this look like on a racial context? Like, what does it look like?
Like, what are the rates of violence against people of color?
Well, so the thing is when you come into prison, you are bringing with you all of your pre-existing social roles. And what I mean by that is, so if I were to go into prison, I'd be, and I would still be an African-American woman who's a mother, right? So I bring that with me to prison. The same thing for anybody else who goes. They go in, they still identify with a particular racial or ethnic group, a religion, a region. If they were a part of a gang or a group before, they identify with it. So that all has a huge impact as well on the fact that when people are looking for protection, they're going to try to bond with people who look and sound and sort of are like them. So if you're going to look for protection, like for me, I might be like, all right, I need to look for people who are from like the Chicago area or people who are of the same racial group as me. And that's sort of what happens behind bars when people are looking for protection. They just naturally gravitate toward who they may gravitate toward on the outside. If that makes sense. That's why prisoners form these subsets based on race. But it is a bit more complicated, but I don't want to go on and on about that. But it's a bit more complicated because correctional officers have a way of causing racial division to ensure that prisoners stay divided on race. And I have very specific examples of that I show in my book.
Because what I feel like, it sounds like in my head, first off, I was imagining like a dog establishing their pack, like dogs, you know what I mean? It's not just because, my husband just watched the movie Alpha. Have you heard of it?
No.
There's a movie Alpha, I guess, that talks about the dog's relationship and how we formed this bond with them because we needed each other, right? It was really a survival thing in needing each other. But you do have people who take dogs, right? And they bring out the worst in them, right? You have owners that get in an environment, they bring out the worst in them, and then they're labeled a certain way. And so it made me think about, are some prison guards like those bad dog owners that are like taking this dog that is not inherently, like pit bulls aren't like inherently violent. They get put in environments where you bring out the worst in the sort of dog based off of the owner. And I hate to compare people to dogs, but it is a level of domestication in a sense behind bars.
Yeah, it's a socialization process, right? I guess the term for it technically is prisonization, which literally is like the process of becoming institutionalized mentally, physically. And what ends up happening is you go in, you're no longer an individual, you're a part of a group of inmates. It's sort of the process of becoming an inmate. You lose all privileges, you lose your individuality, you don't even have a name anymore, you have a number. So that is the regular process of becoming an inmate. But what I am showing is that guards and prison systems in general go above and beyond this. And it's usually on the basis of race or other identifiers. So my main expertise is in California. So I know that historically in California, correctional officers in particular would purposefully lie or exaggerate the threats between groups. So I can give a specific example. Like they would go to the white prisoners and say, we saw the black prisoners over there making shanks, like you guys should be prepared. And this may or may not be true. And a lot of times it may not have been true. But the reason they did that is because they wanted to keep prisoners self-divided along race. And it's because it's a strategic move. Because if we're talking about, it's a society just like any other. So you have all of these political moves that groups make, and correctional officers are their own group. So it's in their best interest for prisoners to be divided along race because they won't be able to organize themselves against correctional officers because there's way more prisoners than there are correctional officers. And so that is a tactic that I have seen historically in California that gets used over and over and over again. And so people wonder, like, why are prisons, especially in California, is home to at least 6 of the major U.S. prison gangs. Were started in California. And my research is showing that the reason for that is because the level of racial conflict that correctional officers and different types of correctional personnel, even up to wardens, purposefully cause prisoners to remain divided, to need to form these full-scale organizations to protect themselves from other prisoners, but also from correctional officers. And that's more speaking to Black and Latino prisoners, actually, protecting themselves from correctional officers. On the flip side, I actually have evidence that correctional officers partnered with white prisoners a lot of times to attack other groups of prisoners, which is a whole other, so it's a whole story of corruption, essentially. We think of prison as this very, I know, we think of it as like a very, it's very divided on the grounds of, you know, inmate officer, but it's not true. You see that race tends to trump those divisions when it comes to needing to survive behind bars.
Wow. So in a sense, I feel like if we're looking at behind bars of who is, in a sense, kind of protected, it's the group of people that look more like what the guards look like, whatever that is.
For a particular period of time, that definitely held true for sure. And I would say leading up to the 80s, that was 100% true. In the 80s in California, and I'm talking about California, in the 80s in California is when you start to see different white supremacist groups actually do begin getting targeted heavily by the Department of Corrections and the FBI. And the reason for that, it's not because of what they've been doing the past 2 decades. The past 2 decades, you know, starting in the 60s, they were, I mean, annihilating Black prisoners like left and right because they felt very threatened by the Black Power movement, which was making its way into the prison system. And which is what we talked about a little bit in part 1, right? And so white prisoners felt very threatened by this. That also, so did correctional officers, which is what sort of propelled them to make these alliances with white prisoners, because they're like, you know, we're all white, essentially, which is something I'm theorizing about currently in my book, is trying to understand, like, why is it white above everything, you know, in this time period? It's like, he's a prisoner, you're an officer, but why does that not matter? And so you see, though, in the 80s, the white supremacists actually get too big for their britches and they start attacking correctional officers. And that's when they start getting systematically locked up in solitary. But it's not until that point, right? It's not until they directly challenge their power source, then they're like, oh, nope, you guys are doing too much, like, you're gone. Yeah, they get swept away. So that, and I think that's very telling for how prisons maintain a level of white supremacy behind bars, because it's not until they challenge the prison directly that they get removed and targeted the same way that Black prisoners were targeted for decades.
And let's talk about how they even got there. Like, when you look at California and you look at, I think in California, when they were having the riots in California, and when, what was it? I'm thinking about the Black Panther Party in California specifically, about how those groups of maybe not completely violent people being targeted and put in a system.
As extremists.
Yeah. Right. So because you were talking about how the Black Power movement, how did that become I guess for the listeners, how did that become an incriminating process, and what did that look like for even with the Nation of Islam? You did some work on that, with those sort of people being put behind bars.
So you mean the process of them being criminalized?
Right, of those sort of things being criminalized to even get to a point where this is something that we're researching behind bars.
Well, I think it first starts out where they are identified Black protest in general is identified as a problem and as a threat to the current racial order. I mean, or the racial order as it stands in America, that's been going on since slavery, right? Because you know any sign of slave protest is annihilated. Any sign of protest. Even going all the way back to Marcus Garvey in the early 1900s, when he tried to unite Pan-African organizations, he's immediately targeted by the FBI. And this resurfaces again with the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King is being targeted. If you look into the FBI documents that are publicly available, all of these people are being targeted because Black protest is it's a direct affront to white supremacy. And so what happens in the 60s is that you see this new wave of Black protest that's saying, you know what, we might need to meet violence with violence, right? Because the only way that white supremacy has been maintained historically in the US is through violence. And so these groups are saying that we have to meet it head on with violence because reform is not going to do anything. We've been trying to reform for a century, and we learned that, we actually need to have a revolution. And so that is what becomes labeled as terrorism by the US Justice Department, and that is what they use to systematically target them for setups, outright murder, as you like. A famous example is Fred Hampton's shooting.
Yep.
And that's what brings a large influx of Black militant. You can call them, I would say militant, because in my research, a lot of them self-describe as militants. And so that's what brings a lot of Black militants into the prison system in the 60s. And also a lot of people who are going into the prison system are joining these groups too behind bars. Right. There are a lot of people who weren't involved prior to prison. So it becomes sort of a hotbed for Black radical protest at this time. Because people are becoming educated too. The people who weren't involved in these movements before, they're being educated by people who are affiliated with these movements, who are like, look around, look at this prison cell, look at this institution, look at how they're partnering with white supremacist prisoners. Doesn't this look just like slavery to you? Like these correctional officers are our overseers, essentially. The warden is our master. That's like the phrasing, right? It's sort of or you call it the framing. In social movement speak, it's the way that people use a specific frame to make it plain for you so that you understand what's happening. And that was very threatening to correctional systems at the time. And I think that also helps explain their willingness to partner with white supremacist prisoners who eventually go on to form the Aryan Brotherhood in the mid-60s, is because this Black threat is just so terrifying that it's like, we can't allow this to stand behind bars.
Where is it today? Because you talked about the 60s, and then how did it progress, and where does it stand now?
The Black militant movement right now?
Yeah.
I mean, I would argue that much of it was decimated in the 70s.
Okay.
Mid-70s, late 70s. Because what ends up happening, at least in California, is that once George Jackson is killed in 1971, are you familiar with like people call it the San Quentin incident, some people call it the San Quentin uprising or rebellion.
Yeah. No, I've never heard of that.
It's basically in 1971, George Jackson, along with others, sort of they plan. And I'm getting this not from like what I've read, but from my interviews, that they planned this escape attempt because they received word that George Jackson was going to be set up and killed by the prison administration, which was a real threat for them at the time because it had happened many times. It happened the year prior in Soledad, if you're familiar with the Soledad incident, which is where you get the term Soledad brothers. So it was a real threat for them, and they believed it, and they were like, okay, we need to get him out, because at this time he was a prominent leader in their movement. And essentially he ends up getting set up, long story short, and is shot in San Quentin in August of 71. And this causes sort of an outcry amongst Black prisoners in California and across the country. And specifically in California, a lot of people end up saying that they're with George or with the movement, but they may not have actually been. It's because he was a martyr. So it's like their movement goes from a very small, close-knit group to thousands.
Wow.
And then that makes it much easier for the Justice Department to infiltrate them especially if you're looking at like the publicly available FBI documents to infiltrate them with undercover
folk.
agents. And so it's really in the 70s, after this happens, they are really able to take down the Black militant movement, because they lock up all of their leaders in solitary. They're able to infiltrate it because the leaders aren't able to control who's joining, because there's so many people joining in the aftermath of this killing, and they're in solitary. So there's a lot of reasons why, but it's really in the 70s that the original political foundation dies, and it sort of morphs into something else that we see today.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask next. What do we see today? What's going on?
Well, so the movement that I'm studying right now it eventually becomes one of the biggest prison gangs in the country.
Really?
And my argument is that it's because once the Department of Corrections specifically targets the political foundation in the 70s, I argue that they do that by design, because Black protest is much more threatening to the institution and their institutional sovereignty than whether or not someone's selling drugs behind bars. If somebody is sort of building a drug trafficking ring in prison, right, that's not as threatening as if somebody's like, I'm about to take out all of you correctional officers and like take out this institution. So what they end up doing is incentivizing this type of criminality, because anybody who is identified as being involved with the original movement gets locked up. People who are engaging in other types of activity, like I said, in the contraband or whatever, they end up sort of escaping the administration's radar in various institutions. So it's a way to incentivize criminality, but police political protest. Mm-hmm. And I believe that it was a deliberate strategy. And so that's just one answer as to why they are able to do that. And there's a whole host of other things, because when when the 80s happened, the drugs that are flowing into society at that time are flowing into prison at the same rate.
Oh, wow.
And so it's sort of a perfect storm as to why the movement is co-opted and sort of morphs at this time in the late 70s, early 80s. It's right at the onset of mass incarceration. You have an influx of prisoners. You have, as I said, the original leadership is gone. So you have a new leadership with a new agenda. And in their defense, you could also argue that they were trying to save the organization, because if they went with the old guard, they would have ended up in solitary.
Yeah, that's right. In solitary or dead.
Where people
exactly
put in solitary more, I think you've studied that as well, right? What's the rates on that?
Yes. To this day, Blacks and Latinos are much more represented in solitary confinement than their proportion in the prison population.
Wow.
Wait, whoa.
Yeah, I was going to say, what does that mean?
Backtrack, because that sounds because we already have this idea that, not we, but a lot of people already have the idea that, Black people and non-white people go to prison more than anybody else because they're just inherently bad. So what you're saying is of the proportion of them that are in prison, it is, my mind is wrong way.
Yeah.
So of the non-white people that are in prison, they're still more likely to be in solitary confinement than white people.
Yes.
Still, that disparity is still there, even though okay, got it, go ahead.
Much more likely to be deemed a security threat that needs to be put in solitary. And also I'm showing that within that subset that's in solitary, people who are validated as belonging to political movements are even more likely to be in solitary. Because I'm doing a study I'm writing an article right now with a friend of mine. And we're using my archival data to show the historical narrative of where this comes from. And then we're using his contemporary statistical analysis to show that it's not just California, that it's widespread and it's current still. So his analysis shows that, for instance, across correctional systems, and that's including jails, the Nation of Islam, for instance, is almost 14 times.
Wow.
Sorry, I don't want to misquote the statistic. So basically, it's that correctional systems who have the Nation of Islam in their prisons or jails are 14 times more likely to use solitary confinement as a disciplinary measure.
Wow.
Which shows that there's a strong correlation between having Black militants in your institution and whether or not you think solitary confinement is useful.
And then can you talk about the effect of solitary confinement too, because I feel like it obviously is disproportionately affecting a population.
I mean, it has a whole, like from the psychology literature, it has a whole host of psychological issues that affect reentry. I mean, that's something that
it would affect recidivism, right? Is that the
yes, I mean, you are significantly more likely to go back to prison if you spend any time in solitary.
Wow. Yeah. And if you're targeting a certain group of people, it's feeding into a narrative.
And what's not, it's not wild to me, but what I think of is when being from Chicago, right? I know the brothers in the nation are pretty freaking smart. Like they are well versed on history. There's so much, even if I'm not Muslim, there's so much that I learned from them just about our history alone. So you're taking, in a sense, which is I'm just saying a smart Black person, right? These being smart and being Negro is almost one of the worst weapons that you can have behind bars, if I hear you correctly. Right?
Yes.
And I believe the only way to stop again, this is me hypothesizing, the only way to stop that knowledge from spreading is to cherry pick the leaders, as you said before, and put them in a place where they can't share that wealth of information in a sense. So have you found anything that supports that, that it is more so what the prisoners know and their intelligence that puts them in solitary confinement, their intelligence coupled with obviously the fact that they're Black, other than anything else, rather than their level of violence?
Oh yeah, that's basically my book in a nutshell, is showing that it's it is directly related to their knowledge and education level, and many of them are self-taught, some not, some university taught, self-taught, whatever. They're some of the smartest people in the prison. For instance, George Jackson, as we were talking about earlier, after he was killed, inside of his cell, the guards retrieved 99 books that were in his cell. They were, it ranged from history to social political theory, such as Marx, Durkheim. And many of these books, because they were in his cell, were quickly banned. And so if you were caught with those books, you would be put in solitary, and in your file, they would flag you as a militant.
And just for having
yes.
And it still happens to this day across many prisons. There are a number of books that you are not allowed to have. Some of, like, for instance, have you heard of, it's a great book by Heather Ann Thompson called Blood in the Water?
Yeah, I have heard of it.
She won the Pulitzer Prize in history, and I know for a fact that in some prisons her book is on the banned list because she is showing sort of the very bloody roots, if you will, that led to the Attica uprising in New York.
What's the Attica uprising for people that don't know? I don't know.
Attica's huge.
Yeah, so the Attica uprising, it happens, it's sort of what sparks it, or what's considered like the igniting event, is when George Jackson was killed in California in 71, August 21st. But the Attica uprising ended up happening September 9th, that same year. And it's basically when a group of prisoners overtook the prison to protest their conditions.
Yes, I remember you did it. Yeah, you did an interview.
Yeah, so you could argue it wasn't caused by the San Quentin event with Jackson, but that definitely was the igniting event. It was caused by, similar to in California, long-standing racial oppression and violence behind bars is what led to them protesting.
Right.
And so her book is showing basically the murder of many of those prisoners and hostages when the governor sends in the police to stop the riot and doesn't want to meet any of their demands. And she's sort of showing the really groundbreaking thing in her book is showing the cover up of how they purposefully killed all of these people. And so her book is on the ban list for that reason, because it's seen as a book that could incite future protests or just educate people on it.
What you're saying almost to me like mirrors society of like how, almost like how I raise my son is like, don't give them any reason. Because like you said, it was like, all they needed was a reason to kill all these, like all they needed was, look, it doesn't take much. And it, unfortunately, like you said, it's a society of its own behind bars. And it's not much different ideology from than the way that we are living. Only only they're living by a different set of rules.
And is this all rooted in white supremacy? I mean, is that kind of the bottom line?
Yeah, it's rooted in a whole, because white supremacy, it's more than an ideology.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at how it functions behind bars, it's supported by I would say a social psychological enjoyment of being in control. And
when that control is threatened, what do we do?
People will do whatever it takes.
Right.
And that's why you
clearly see today.
And that's why in prison you see this alliance between correctional officers and white prisoners, because it's like, you would think, well, they're prisoners. What? It's like, no, it's they will do whatever it takes to maintain control.
And I feel like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy too. Like if you're targeting these people, you start to dehumanize them, and then you see them as people to target. You know what I mean? You kind of almost like make it okay. In their minds, they say they're already criminals. This is fine.
And the truth is that the prison guards are not in prison, so they come out. They are out in society, moving and shaking, and they are shaping the paradigms of very many people. And it just, between, like what you're saying, between the prison guards and we talk about policing, it is hard to understand why we still have European American people that don't understand why movements like Black Lives Matters are so important.
Yeah, it's hard to connect the dots.
Why it's met with such resistance, because this black skin has been criminalized, right? And once it's been since the beginning since as long as we can learn and research it. Actually, that's not true, because at one point you did have people coming to Africa to read, to learn, to teach, to do all for all these different things. But in the United States of America, our skin is also a crime.
Yeah.
And so it is very difficult. I guess it's very difficult for me when I meet people, European Americans, that aren't able to get that.
Mm-hmm.
And to see why they're so, not look at us as we're just inherently bad people and say you guys are just behind bars because you're not smart. Well, you were deprived of education for so many years, because you're criminals. Well, we're being targeted. Like, aren't able to see these things as facts rather than their own.
Yeah, they're taking
theories.
the lazy way out. It's just seeing stereotypes.
They're seeing them as facts.
It's the wrong word, but like self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm just sure, like, they see a stereotype and say, of course it's that way.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course you.
Look at the rates of, people use that. I've heard them say that. The rates of incarcerated Black people or, you know, people of color to whites, and then they don't dig into history, so then they just accept what they hear. That makes sense?
Yeah, and even the statistics have a story, right?
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
a reason why those statistics are the way they are.
People of color are more inherently bad, or, you know, do more than white people. It's if you look at history, they've been targeted, right? Is that
yeah,
true? You said
exactly.
I think your work said they were 5 times more likely to be in prison.
In 1960, African Americans even back then were 5 times more likely than whites to be in prison.
What is that now?
Now the rate, I don't want to misquote it because it just changed.
Sure.
It just changed recently.
Yeah. I wanted to know just to see if we've gotten better or worse or stayed the same.
Okay. I'm gonna look up the most recent.
Yeah.
And I will even say, to add to this whole getting of Black folks behind bars, is the reason, is another layer to look at, is the school to prison pipeline, what that looks like, why that looks that way, and why our boys and girls are so young, getting indoctrinated into the, what did you call it? You used the word for it, prisonality or whatever you said. I don't know.
Prisonization is what
prisonization, right? Why they're
socialized into the prison culture.
Yeah, and I think in some ways
before they're even going in.
Well, if I look at a school, right? If I look at, and I'll use my own, I don't know if I should, but I look at the what puts a child in the school to prison pipeline. It is almost, not almost, I think it is that. It's like conditioning them to believe that they are inherently bad people.
Yeah.
Because
this is what they're destined for.
And that is, yeah. Because even you look at my son, who's a pretty smart kid. I don't hate to put his business out there, but he stood up and talked about this at an event. Is that he's like, I feel like I am always being watched, and that anything I do is more wrong than any other child.
The consequences are worse.
It's very inquisitive to say that.
Yeah.
Most times people just internalize it. They don't realize it, that it's someone else doing that to them. They're like, oh, I just must be bad.
Hideous. Exactly. Why would you, especially as a young child, you don't know to be introspective. You don't even know what that means to figure out that these messages are being put on you.
They're put on you. And the thing about it, and I love him. He is a very smart boy. And to hear this, it's like, well, he's smart as hell. Why would they do that to him? It's because, look at him. Like, the fact that he's Black is not going to change his whole life. And I have to remember that he can be as smart as I want him to be. He can be as well spoken as whatever as he wants to be, but he's still a Black boy. And there are people that don't know that they have these biases, don't know that they are, that they're just doing it because it's just a part of their fabric. I'm saying European Americans, it's a part of their fabric. We look at school resource officers. Okay, that's like our prison guards. Right. Right? Do you know what I mean? And he said, I watched them. I watched other kids do things in the lunchroom, and nothing gets said then. But the moment I speak something loudly or say, hey, I'm immediately reprimanded. So that I'm looking at our schools and saying, are we doing the same thing? Preparing them for we just got our suspension rates dropped down here in Virginia. So I think you can only suspend based off age level so many days, but I know it's max is like 45 days of school, because I just feel like, again, it is to, one, keep our kids dumb, right? You keep them out of school, you keep them smart, right? And then two, to prepare them for the life that white supremacy wants them to have, or says that they're supposed to have.
Exactly.
System that's doing that, like, so insidiously, like no one's saying it, but they're doing it, or do you think it's something that's happening and they're not even aware of it because society tells us that black people are inherently bad, or are doing these things to be put in prison? I just wonder, how insidious is it? Is it both? Are there people that are truly targeting Black children and doing that, or is it just because there's implicit bias, like severe bias?
It's a mix, because I think that it is implicit. Like, some people, they don't realize that they're targeting Black children.
I'm not trying to defend white
they
people,
don't notice it.
think it's just, I think it's just so ingrained with all of us, and that's what in effect white supremacy has done to everyone. You know, it's not. All right. Well,
I think there are people though who do have a very nefarious agenda, and I think that, but I think that what's scary about those people is that those people have the same justifications as the ones who have implicit bias.
Yeah.
So the ignorant ones and the ones that are like, you know, you could call them evil-minded. You could argue that they have the same justifications, right? Because the people who have the implicit bias are like, no, he's just bad. And the people who are evil-minded are like, no, they're bad. So it's like, it's the same, they have the same root issue, in my opinion.
And they're not willing to examine if they're challenged with it, but they're not even challenged with the fact that they may have bias, which is the problem.
Exactly. And the issue is that you have to try to, like we were talking about before, you do have to try to change people's mindset. But I feel like on the flip side, this is where the protest comes in, is that you have to empower Black parents to stand up for their rights and their children's rights. Because I feel like it has to be both. And that's really what you learn when you look at the history of Black protests, is that it's teaching you, like, yes, we can try to change, quote, you know, white people, but we also have to be willing to stand up for ourselves, because it's both. It has to come from the top down and the bottom up for there to actually be sustained change. I looked up some rates, by the way, to make sure that I had the exact rate.
Yeah.
So now it's African Americans are still incarcerated now at about 5 times the rate of whites.
So it hasn't changed.
We ain't getting no better.
No. I had a feel in my mind. I was thinking it was similar. Like I was gonna say I think it's 6 times, but it's 5. So it's basically exactly the same.
I don't want to give anybody any excuses.
No.
Because I know the work that I want to do in my corner of the world, but I also know that when I try to get Black parents to step up, when it's like, we got to do this, there is that mentality that things are the way they are. They're going to be this way. There's nothing that we can do about it, which I think is supported by the oppression of Black intelligence and Black political movements. It's like, if we try to do anything, it's not going to end well. Either my kids are going to pay a consequence for it. I want to be around. I got to work. What is it? Work, pay taxes, and die. Like, be Black and die.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Like, because there has been your death. It was almost, your life was almost a consequence for stepping up and speaking out. And not everybody's willing to do that, which is why the leaders were so important.
Exactly, because you see, in an issue too, and that's why the level of educating people about the social determinants of their inequality, basically educating them, like, do not believe what you've been told, that the reason you are here in this predicament is all because of your own doing. That's what we are told in American society. We are a society that privileges the American dream. So we tell people, like, you know, you're poor, or you're a criminal, or all these things because of what you've done, not what society has done to you, or what it hasn't done at all in your benefit. And I think that that's why these Black leaders are so dangerous, because they're educating people on, like, no, like, this is how racism and white supremacy functions in American society, to purposely keep you down. But they don't want us to tell you that, or explain it to you, because then that gives you the empowerment to stand up against it, versus you just saying, you know, oh, well, no, I'm in this predicament because I'm dumb and I'm all these, like, negative things that I've been told. And I think also we're at a disadvantage, going back to the parenting point, we're at a disadvantage in terms of standing up against when our children are mistreated and targeted, because a lot of research suggests that parents who are more likely to protest just in general, regardless of race, it's very classist, right? So it's parents who have more income, have a higher level of education, are way more likely to be like, you can't treat my child like this, versus someone, and because African Americans are, because of the huge disparities in our class level compared to whites, and then when you add race to it, we're even less likely to sort of feel like we have the ability to say anything to a principal that might not be just an okay, you know, and this goes to all facets of life. not even just in school, even with the doctor. The doctor can tell you this and that about your kid. I remember even my daughter's appointment, the doctor was like talking to me about something that he thought, and he kind of was talking to me in a way that I didn't appreciate. And I said, well, you know what, you can just explain it to me scientifically, because I am about to have my PhD, so I understand exactly what you're talking about in terms of what is likely to cause these types of illnesses. And then he was like, oh, I didn't realize. I said, yeah, you didn't realize.
You had to qualify yourself. Like you had to qualify yourself walking in the room. And I know you know this from us being on the campaign trail, and how many parents were like, I don't want to go. One, I don't want to sound dumb.
Right.
And two, when they're talking to me, it's like, I don't know how to come back, because
feel empowered to go in and say, because they made her feel stupid.
She felt stupid.
A woman tell me that
on the campaign trail.
I think her son was having some behavioral issues, but she didn't want to go into the system because they would talk down to her or make her question herself. It's almost like gaslighting. It's a form of abuse, because it's making you question the truth when she knows the truth, that they're making her question. You know what I mean?
Put them on the medicine or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Which
this brings it home for me, is why what you do is so important.
Yeah.
Because without statistics, and unfortunately, we don't believe narratives. We're a very numbers-driven society, which I understand. But if someone's not putting it out there, not putting the research out there, it's hard to make those connections. And unfortunately, as a white person, it's hard to understand it if you don't live it. And that's not an excuse, but once we see your work and hear it, it's kind of hard. I always say this: once you know, you know. You can't not. I always tell my friends that once you listen to my podcast, you're some level awoke.
It's true, unless they are able to compartmentalize, and then they're having an issue with cognitive dissonance, right? Because they know what's real, but then they still want to hold on to white is right.
And that in and of itself is the white supremacy complex.
Yeah, and white privilege.
Exactly.
To do that.
Yeah,
and that's for the people that it's even hard for white people to swallow implicit bias. You know what I mean? I know, and I share it openly. I've shared that I've had biases, and I'm not ashamed of it. I always tell Jackie, there's no point in apologizing for what, but I've been indoctrinated in a system that made people of color seem less than. It just all the horrible things, and it's taken a lot of work to unlearn those things and work on them.
Yeah. So if you were, I loved this conversation.
Yeah.
Only because I feel like as a Black person, it reignites my sense of purpose in doing and standing up and saying something and educating myself, because I think that's probably the hardest thing to do. Feeling so connected to, I'll just tell people the diaspora is real. We all do really feel connected to each other in some way, shape, or form. And so sometimes researching and listening can be very painful, actually very painful, and can be tough. It snatches sometimes hope from you. You're just God, where does it end? But, when I hear people like you speak, and then the work that you're doing and making it plain for people like me or people like us that just don't really get that, especially when it comes to prison, that is a whole nother world, and that those people are humans too, and that there's something that they are going through as well. That, you know what I mean? Because we look at it, your neighbors, and I have two of my neighbors are felons, that recent, they're old men and they've gotten their rights to vote back, but it's they've been a part of this system, and they say and do things that I have to understand the time in which they were in these systems, and that they are proof that you can move forward, but they are few.
Yeah.
They are few, and they've been given a chance, and I'm blessed that I'm their neighbors and that we have the people around them rather than anyone else, that would keep. So thank you for what you do.
Seriously.
For making.
Thank you all for
of course
using this platform. I think that I would encourage you to have a conversation with your neighbors and maybe even a life history conversation, because I'd be curious to hear about their childhood through their experiences that led them to having contact with the criminal justice system, because that's really eye-opening, because then you start to see a lot of parallels with people who've been incarcerated. There's all these similarities, in their early life histories before they even made it to prison.
That's a good of an idea.
That's a good.
Yeah, because that was my next question is like, so once white people are exposed to this information, what would you suggest we do, or what is a helpful way to be an ally? I don't know if you like that word, that's controversial, but, you know, how can we do better, you know, to partner?
I think that it starts with interpersonal relationships and communication, because the thing is like when people hear about, you know, racial injustice or inequality, a lot of times they just turn it off, right? They're like, I'm not listening to any of that race talk anymore. So it's really about, in my opinion, what makes the most change is when you are able to really take the time to have a full-on conversation or dialogue with someone, and to try to understand where they're coming from, but then present your viewpoint in a way that they can understand. Because I think when you see a lot of the big changes and progress that we've had, they've come from, you know, legal battles, right? In the courts, that is true. But legal victories tend to occur because there's been widespread, sweeping cultural change about how we think about issues. And the only way that you end up having cultural change is through these interpersonal connections at the ground level that happen over time and build to then you see a society that's more accepting and more inclusive over time. So I would say that it just starts with, what can you do with your neighbors in your own hood, your own neighborhood? Yeah, what can you do?
Where the name comes from, yeah.
Exactly, because you look at our society 50 years ago, we've come a long way in terms of cultural change, and in terms of how we think about race. We have a far way to go, but we wouldn't have had a lot of these legal successes if there weren't some level of change.
Sure.
And that happens from the ground up.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, it's sometimes, I would say, for white people, it takes a relationship, like you said, because you can hear statistics all day long and you can hear stories, but it's that personal friendship, because, you know, whatever affects her affects me, because ultimately we're friends.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's like, oh my God, how can I not care? You know? So, because I hear that all the time from my white friends. It's just, it's hard to connect, you know, unless you see a face, you know. So that's a great piece of advice.
I feel like that's your so what, now what.
It
You
really
remember we
is.
did that? Our so what, now what?
Yeah.
So what?
Yeah, it really is.
Fish is real. Now what? Get to know some people.
Right.
I mean,
diversify your environment.
Yes. Treat your environment like you treat your portfolio.
I think too, and this is because I've heard feedback on this. A lot of my white friends are like, I live in white spaces. Like, I don't know how. Like, I can't just go find a black friend. You know, like or any person of color. You know, and it's hard to just genuinely have those relationships happen. But to me, when we say diversify, it could be watching, you know, more shows with leading, you know, people of color, you know, and actors, or reading diversifying the books that we read. I was just at a conference this weekend. They were like, how many of you in your book lineup, go to your Kindle, are all the authors white? And this was to white people. And I was like, oh my God, me too. And I do this work. You know, so it's just like diversify could be on your Twitter or on your Instagram. Like, who are you following? You know, are they all white people? Are they activists? Because that can just be eye-opening in itself. I know I found that to be helpful.
Yeah. Do you have anything? Do you have any recommended watching, reading for someone who's like, maybe I want to know, it doesn't matter what you look like, but it's like, you know, I'd like to know more about this, or I'd like to give myself a better understanding of these sorts of things, or have a paradigm shift that all people that go behind bars aren't just these evil, you know.
Yeah, like any stories from,
or anything that you would read or that you would watch. Because I know 13th's out there, which is on Netflix.
Yeah.
PBS did a special on the Black Panther movement, which was really amazing and talked about those sorts of things. But what, you have anything that you would recommend?
Yeah, I think in terms of following sort of an everyday, everyday dialogues about what we've been talking about, people should look into The Root. Excuse me, I'm going to drink water. The Root is a really great resource and sort of amalgam of writings, authors from academia, authors from general media, but it's great. also the Black Detour, the magazine that I follow. And in terms of specifically criminal justice and just sort of staying woke on justice issues, definitely The Appeal or the Marshall Project, I recommend. They do a great job of making all of these statistics that we've been talking about, just making it plain.
Sure.
And they have a lot of narratives too from people who are formerly incarcerated or incarcerated, which is great at the Marshall Project.
And Just Mercy, we always quote that.
Oh yeah, Just Mercy. That
was,
was yeah.
His work. He's a lawyer in the South, and I think he actually runs the Southern Poverty Law Center. But anyway, they study all this stuff, and he works with prisoners on death row.
EJI, EJI is
yeah.
They don't do much on social media. I would say that. There's not much you can get from them, but their calendar is phenomenal. If you ever get the EJI calendar, each day they tell you something. Like this month is all about Chinese American plight. So it talks about every I didn't either until I read the calendar and it says all the stuff on there. And I'm like, oh, I learned this about but cool. Those are some great, man.
So she did her So What, Noah. What's ours?
Well, you go ahead. You want to go? I don't know. I'll go.
I said it earlier, but I'll say it again. When I look at diversification of something, it's not just, ideally, right, you want to have friends that don't look like you, and it doesn't even have to be color. It can be religion, sexual identity, whatever, but diversify everything you take in. Because I think doing this work for me has been about like, oh my gosh, yeah, I really do just follow, white people. And it's not even on purpose. It's just kind of, I wasn't even aware of it. So going through your Twitter feed, going through your Instagram feed, going through your Kindle, going through your podcasts, who do you listen to, stuff like that. So just the importance of hearing other voices, not just people, but it's diversity is good in general because you don't know until you know.
That's true.
Yeah. So that would be and so what is your work is very important. Because it connects the dots. I mean, there's many reasons, but for me on a practical level as a white person, it's like your work is so important because it teaches me. I don't know, I don't know the facts. And sometimes you don't have access to a community that doesn't look like you. So your work can kind of bridge that gap.
I agree. I would say, So What, the past can be hurtful, right? Yeah. And the present can be very hurtful. Just listening to the things that you're talking about. But I think the now, what in all of that is taking an opportunity to humanize people who have been a part of the criminal justice system or have been affected or influenced by it. Maybe that is watching. There's so many different things they do, like Locked Up or not Locked Up. It's like I can't think about putting something else Netflix did, but they just talk to people that are behind bars and get the real story about how they are actually. I think it's called One Time or one First Step or something like that. Just talking to them and making them humans. Period. Just incarcerated people. Period. But you will notice a lot of those stories are from people of color. There are, European Americans in there, but it will kind of get you an understanding of that they're like humans. They're not less than. And I think we do see when we talk about this, why would we even talk about issues behind bars? Because these are also humans that will ultimately.
And we hopefully want some of them to come back into society.
Exactly. That hopefully ultimately they will be back in society in some way, shape, or form. And even looking at why are we now trying to make sure that these folks can vote when they come back into society? Why was that taken from them? Why, you know what I mean? Like just humanizing folks in the criminal justice system and understanding that, yes, non-white people are disproportionately affected by this system. And if you don't take time to get closer to your implicit bias, you are also supporting this system.
Yeah, and I would add to that, it's like, it is scary as a white person to admit that you have these preconceived notions that Black people are bad, because I don't know if I've had that thought, but you definitely had the thought where I didn't have empathy for people that were in prison. It was just easy to not see them as a person. And so I would even charge white people to sit with that feeling that you have those biases, it's not necessarily, I'm not giving anyone an out, but it's not necessarily because you want to believe that. It's just messages that have been given to us over and over again. You know what I mean? Because I look at myself, I'm like, how could I have these biases? I thought I was a great person. What's wrong with me? Because I have had these thoughts. I would argue, I'm not saying there's necessarily anything wrong with me for having the thoughts. They've been planted there or seen throughout in the media. And so it's because like you said, it's very uncomfortable to admit that to yourself. It's scary. It's like, oh my God, I don't want to be a bad person, because we don't want to. Who wants to think of ourselves as bad? You know.
Exactly. I think you have to get people to really engage with their implicit bias. I think you have to ask them comparative questions. I think I find that useful. So like one thing is you could ask them, you know, how do you feel? Just imagine, you know, a young white boy, you know, maybe he's in like 6th grade and he's peddling like, you know, marijuana in the middle school. Like, how do you feel about him? What should be done about him?
Right.
And then people will probably tell you, oh, well, he's, you know, he's just being delinquent. Like maybe we should, you know, put him into some sort of program and rehabilitate him or whatever. But then ask them, okay, well, how would you feel if he was Black? And really think about if he was Black and envision him like doing the exact same thing. What does that trigger what's your initial reaction? And some people will be honest, and I think a lot of people will be honest, maybe not out loud, but on the inside.
Yeah.
Their initial reaction is, oh, he's dangerous. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the same setup, still a little kid, but he becomes dangerous. And then the follow-up is why is there that difference for you? And some people will be willing to go there and others won't. But I think it's at least trying to have these comparisons where the only difference is skin color and see how people react to that.
Yeah. Wow. Comparative questions. I love that.
I like it.
Yes.
I like it a lot.
Well, thank you.
I do.
I keep taking so
when can we
guys.
expect your book? What can we expect this next?
Yeah.
What you said you're writing an article and then you have a book coming out. When can we expect these things?
So right now I have a recent essay that I wrote that is detailing solitary confinement against Black militants. And so that's in the eminent frame right now, but I'm working on an article form, which is just like a longer form using more evidence currently. And then the book, I'm busy working on it. I'm hoping to get it under review next year sometime with the publisher. So we shall see, fingers crossed.
Well,
it's already done, and we've already bought our copies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, it's done. I do have a full draft. So I'm just kind of polishing it up right now and preparing to submit it in January.
Congratulations.
Hello, Curly Professor. Head girl.
We're so proud of you.
I see you over there. And then you said you're going to New Jersey. Tell the people why you're going to New Jersey.
Yes, I'll be going to New Jersey in November because in January I'm starting at Rutgers as an assistant professor.
I feel smarter knowing you. At least I do.
I get 3% more smartness because I had this conversation with you. 3%. That's a lot. Gotta have more conversations with you, then I'll get up there.
Yes, I'd love to be back.
Yes. Oh, for sure.
Anytime. I don't care if you think of something. We don't care. Yeah. If you're like, you know what, y'all, we need to talk about this.
Yeah, please do.
We're there.
Yeah.
All right, I'll bug you.
Yeah,
do it. We just had somebody email us text us over the weekend and ask if we would do one on blackface. So like we're doing it like today.
I love, though,
you are? Like following Megyn Kelly's fiery.
Yes. Well, that's what it came from. You know what I love, though? I think that we do, and I think we do well. It was a white woman, and she felt comfortable to ask us this question. Now, I read it, and I was like, you're so ignorant. But then I have to remember, she's coming to us. Like, these are important conversations, and we want to keep being the way we are because we want people to come forward and ask the questions that are uncomfortable. You know, that they're like, you know, that may seem ignorant, but they don't have. I was just talking to a girlfriend she's studying to get her master's to be an ESL teacher, and she's just now asking questions, you know, about race and trying to unpack all that. And she said she got yelled at in the classroom because it wasn't in an environment to ask. They're like, you know, you should know. And she grew up in white, where I did, you know, and she's like, where do I go? You know what I mean? She's like, I'm just trying to learn. And so I'm grateful that we can present that to people.
Yep.
You know? because look, white people have to ask some stupid questions. It sounds stupid, but we don't know. It's not an
Look,
excuse, but
I'm gonna tell you, like my husband told me this morning. He said,
Oh,
in
no.
preparation for the blackface conversation, he said, "Listen, you have to understand." He's like, "Would you make fun of a person in a wheelchair?" I said, "No, I wouldn't." He's like, "Then don't make fun of white people that don't understand. It's like a disability.
Yeah.
They've had it their whole life."
right. And if you haven't met anyone,
And
it's
if
a
you don't,
different culture.
you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
this is truly a disability for them to be a part of a whole people sort of society. They have been disabled. They have a handicap.
Yeah.
Whether they,
But it's societal.
it is what it is. Like, you're what do you call it? You have a pre-existing condition of superiority.
Yeah. And sometimes you don't even know it. We
That's
don't
deep.
know it. Yeah.
Even though,
Yeah. So that's what we got to do now is talk about blackface and why.
yeah, we're gonna talk about blackface today.
And appropriate coping costumes.
Look, yeah, we're gonna do it. It's gonna be good.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah. So, when will hers air? Probably.
We wanted to air yours back to back. That's
Yeah.
how we were holding on to your other one, because we wanted it to be
It'll
two
probably
parts.
be the Halloween one, and then her first
Yeah,
one.
we'll do the Halloween, and then you'll be next Tuesday and the Tuesday after.
Yep.
Okay.
2 Tuesdays in
Oh
a
yeah,
row
and
with
send
acrylic
us a
press.
headshot. Do you have a headshot? We do some. She does the graphics.
Yeah, you got a
Oh,
picture that you love for us to show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a few headshots.
Okay, great. She creates some graphics that we can share, and you can share.
Yes.
Okay.
All your handles and stuff.
Yes.
But thank you for being in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. This is it's hard stuff to talk about, but you all make it fun in the end.
Thank you.
I'm glad we end on a happy note.
Yeah. We try to. We try to.
I'm hugging you. You see my hands over here?
Virtual hug.
Yeah, we call those bugs. All right. Well, you try to enjoy your day for whatever's worth left of it. You conferencing. You said no? Yes, no?
Oh, not today. No, today's writing day. The rest of the day.
Wow. Good for you.
Oh my God. God bless your
Yeah,
heart.
I know. Writing is hard. I have a journalism degree, so I had to write a lot. And it's like, I love it, but hate it. You know what I mean?
Writing is frustrating because my thoughts are faster than my fingers and my hands.
I feel you.
I'll be right. I knew I just had something good and I lost it. It's gone forever.
You know what? That means you would benefit from talking into your phone, like Google Voice, where it transcribes.
She does.
That's what I do.
I go through the same thing because I would try to journal just to be mental health better. And I was like, hey, Jackie, I can't do this. It pisses me off because the same thing. I'm just even typing. I can't. She's like, just talk. And it's been so helpful.
Just record yourself. That's from going, like I told her, that's from therapy.
So smart.
Yes, that's from prolonged exposure therapy.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I can say stuff and still gain something from it. But
You really can.
Yeah. Okay, won't hold you up. Won't hold you up.
Thank you, man.
Kiss the babies.
I know.
And thank the husband.
Yeah.
For the time that they allow us to share with you.
Yes.
Thank you. I will.
Take care.
Make it a great day.
Bye. You too. Talk to you later.
Yeah.
Bye.